Part 1. The trap is set. The night felt colder than usual as Lynn sat in the small, dimly lit room, the silence heavy with the weight of her thoughts. She stared out the window, the faint glow of the streetlights casting long shadows over her. She was waiting, not for something good to happen, but for the inevitable. Brian had made it clear, he was going to force her to stay with him, no matter the cost. And she knew deep down that escape wasn't going to be easy. Brian had always been possessive, but tonight felt different. His eyes, cold and calculating, haunted her every step. He'd already cornered her once again, and this time, there would be no mercy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The clock on the wall ticked louder with each passing second, its hands moving slower, mocking her sense of time. Her heart pounded in her chest, and every instinct screamed at her to run, to break free before it was too late. But she had to be careful. One wrong move and Brian would make her pay. He always had a way of twisting everything, making it seem like she was the one who was out of control. But Lynn wasn't the same person she used to be. She had learned to play the game, to survive. She had been through hell and back, and she wasn't about to let Brian or anyone else control her anymore. Just then, the door creaked open, and Brian's silhouette filled the doorway. His presence was overpowering, his confidence radiating like a dark cloud. "Lynn," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. "You know what I want. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way." Her stomach churned, but she forced herself to keep her composure. She couldn't let him see how much he terrified her. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Brian," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "Not anymore." He stepped closer, his footsteps deliberate and slow, each one echoing in the quiet room. "You don't have a choice," he said. "You never did." The weight of his words sank into her chest like a stone. She had tried to leave before, tried to break free of his grasp, but every time, he had dragged her back, forcing her to play his twisted game. This time, however, she had a plan. She wasn't going to fall into his trap again. "Think about it, Lynn," he continued, his eyes narrowing as he reached for her. "Once Liam is out of the picture, you'll have nothing left. No one will save you. You'll be mine." Lynn flinched at the mention of Liam. It had always been Liam, her rock, her constant in a sea of chaos. But she knew Brian wouldn't stop until he had destroyed everything she cared about, starting with Liam. And yet, despite the fear rising in her chest, Lynn couldn't let Brian win. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up outside. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. Brian didn't seem to notice the sound. He was too focused on trying to break her spirit, trying to make her believe that she had no way out. But Lynn knew better. She had made up her mind. No matter what it took, she was getting out of here tonight. As Brian reached for her, his grip tightening around her wrist, she saw her chance. With every ounce of strength she could muster, she twisted her body, breaking free from his hold. She ran towards the door, but just as she reached the handle, a loud crash rang through the room. Brian had thrown something across the room in a fit of rage. "Don't you dare leave me," he snarled, his voice full of fury. But Lynn didn't look back. She threw open the door and bolted into the hallway, her heart pounding as she heard Brian's footsteps chasing after her. But she wasn't alone. A figure stepped into her path, blocking her escape. "Lynn," the figure said, his voice calm but commanding. It was Liam. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Lynn's breath caught in her throat, a mix of relief and fear flooding her chest. Liam was here, but the look on his face told her this wasn't the reunion she had hoped for. Brian appeared behind her, his rage palpable, his eyes locked on Liam with pure venom. "You shouldn't have come back," Brian spat, his voice dripping with hatred. "She's mine, and you won't take her from me." Liam didn't flinch. He stood tall, his gaze unwavering as he looked at Brian. "I'm not here for you, Brian," he said, his tone cold. "I'm here for Lynn. You've done enough damage." Lynn took a step back, her mind racing. She had hoped this moment would be her salvation, but now she realized it was just the beginning of a much darker battle. Brian wasn't going to let her go without a fight, and Liam was now a target in his twisted game. As the tension between the two men thickened, Lynn's mind began to spin. She had to make a choice, stay and fight for her freedom, or run and leave everything behind. Before she could decide, Brian lunged forward, his hands reaching for Lynn. "You'll regret this, I swear," he hissed. Liam reacted instantly, his strong arms pulling Lynn back just as Brian's hand grazed her arm. "Get away from her," Liam shouted, shoving Brian away with all his strength. But Brian wasn't done yet. He staggered back, his face twisted in fury, and lunged again, this time aiming for Liam. "You think you can stop me?" he growled. Lynn watched in horror as the two men clashed. Liam fought back, but it was clear he was injured, his movements slower than they should have been. Brian, on the other hand, was fueled by rage, his attacks more vicious with every passing second. In the chaos, Lynn realized the terrible truth: she was stuck in the middle of a war between two men who both wanted to control her. And no matter how hard she tried to escape, she knew that neither of them would ever let her go. Part 2. The reckoning. The moment Liam shoved Brian away, time seemed to stretch into eternity. The violence in the room was palpable, the air thick with the sound of grunts, slaps, and the sickening thud of flesh meeting flesh. Lynn's heart raced as she stumbled backward, watching helplessly. She didn't know what to do, whether to stay or run, whether to be relieved or terrified. Brian was relentless. His anger had consumed him entirely. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and fixated solely on Liam, as though the world had narrowed down to this one fight. He threw himself at Liam again, his fists aimed with cruel precision. "You think you can just walk in here and take her from me?" he yelled. "She's mine, you understand? Mine." Liam, though clearly worn out and weaker than he'd ever been, managed to deflect Brian's punches, using the little energy he had left to push him back. His face, bruised and battered, was set in a grim expression, a mix of determination and pain. But Lynn could see the cracks in his armor. He was not as strong as he once was. The injuries he had sustained before were still fresh, still a hindrance. She could see it now, in the way his movements were slow and strained. "Brian, stop!" Lynn shouted, her voice hoarse. She wanted to reach out, to make it stop, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the chaos unfolding before her. Liam's injuries made it clear, he wasn't invincible. He couldn't protect her forever. Brian paused for a moment, looking at her as though she were the one who had betrayed him. "You think he'll protect you, Lynn?" he sneered, his voice thick with venom. "He'll let you down, just like everyone else." Liam didn't say anything, his only response was a sharp punch to Brian's stomach that made him stagger back. But Brian wasn't done. He recovered quickly, a wild gleam in his eye, and lunged once more. "Stop it!" Lynn cried, her voice breaking with panic. Her words seemed to have no effect. The men were lost in their rage, blind to everything but their battle. But then, something shifted. The sound of sirens, distant at first, grew louder. The clash of fists slowed as all three of them turned toward the open window. Lynn's breath caught in her throat. The police were coming. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't let Brian have the upper hand. Liam's head snapped back toward her. His voice was softer now, strained but urgent. "Lynn, get out of here, go." But Lynn didn't move. The overwhelming fear in her chest was slowly being replaced by something else, a spark of determination. She had come this far. She had survived the worst of Brian's torment, and she wasn't going to let him win now. She could run, but would she ever be free? Would she ever truly escape his grip? Before she could make up her mind, the door behind them burst open, and several armed officers flooded into the room, their presence commanding attention. "Freeze," one of them shouted. "Put your hands in the air." Lynn's heart raced even faster, but this was the moment she had been waiting for. Brian froze, his body tense with fury, his hands still clenched into fists. The officers, however, weren't intimidated. They moved quickly, seizing Brian and restraining him before he could make another move. Lynn stood still, her breath shaky, watching as the officers took control. Liam turned to her, his expression softening. "Lynn, are you okay?" But she couldn't answer him. Her mind was spinning, her body trembling as the adrenaline coursed through her. She had been in this nightmare for far too long. The police were here, but her mind kept replaying Brian's words, "You'll be mine." The officers pulled Brian to his feet, and he struggled, his face twisted with rage. "You can't take me!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "You won't get away with this, Lynn. I'll make you regret this. I'll make you regret every second you've spent with him." Liam didn't flinch. "Take him away," he ordered, his voice firm. The officers immediately obeyed, dragging Brian out of the room despite his continued struggles. As they disappeared from view, the room finally felt quiet again. Lynn looked at Liam, her eyes brimming with tears. She felt the weight of everything that had happened, the torment, the fear, the control. But now that Brian was gone, a new kind of uncertainty lingered. She had been freed from his grip, but was she truly safe? Was she free? Liam, sensing her hesitation, stepped closer. "You're safe now, Lynn," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "He can't hurt you anymore." Lynn wanted to believe him, but a part of her couldn't. She couldn't just erase the years of fear, of manipulation, of being trapped in a prison of Brian's making. Even though the officers had come, and Brian was being taken away, she didn't feel the sense of relief she had imagined. Not yet. But something shifted in her. Maybe it was the way Liam looked at her, the tenderness in his eyes, or maybe it was the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she knew this was the beginning of something new. She wasn't just going to survive anymore. She was going to take back control. Liam reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and gently cupped her cheek. "We're going to get through this together, Lynn. I promise." Tears welled in Lynn's eyes as she stared at him. She had longed for this, his presence, his protection, his warmth. But could she truly trust him? Could she let go of the fear that had been her constant companion for so long? Before she could answer, there was a knock at the door. A tall officer, the one who had first burst in, stepped inside. "Ma'am," he said, his voice professional but not unkind. "We need you to come with us. We have to take your statement." Lynn nodded, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She turned to Liam, her gaze lingering on him for just a moment longer before she followed the officer out of the room. As she walked down the hallway, her steps slow and hesitant, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Brian may have been taken into custody, but there was still so much left to unravel. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure, she couldn't do this alone. And maybe, just maybe, Liam was the one person who could help her finally be free. Part 3. Unraveling the past. Lynn sat in the sterile, dimly lit room, the cool surface of the metal table beneath her fingers grounding her in the present. She was numb, her body still processing the chaotic events of the past hours. The police had taken her statement, their questions sharp and probing, but she had answered them as best as she could. She knew it was important, necessary, even. But it felt like a blur. Every word she spoke seemed to echo in her mind, haunting her, reminding her of everything she had endured. Outside the small room, the bustle of officers could be heard as they moved through the building. The hum of phones ringing, the clatter of boots on the tile floor, it all felt distant, like she was in a world separate from the reality she had once known. Her life had changed in an instant, and now she didn't know where to go from here. Liam's face kept flashing before her eyes, the warmth in his gaze, the way he had held her when she was at her most vulnerable. But was it enough? Could she truly trust him after everything? After all the years of betrayal, of being manipulated and controlled, could she open herself to someone again? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The officer who had escorted her earlier entered, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, you're free to go." "We've processed your statement. You're not under arrest or suspicion, but you may need to stay available for further questioning. Are you ready to leave?" Lynn nodded, but a wave of dizziness washed over her as she stood. She hadn't realized how drained she was until now, her body aching from the emotional and physical toll of the past few days. It wasn't just the trauma of Brian's actions, or the fear that had gripped her for so long. It was the weight of everything she had kept buried inside, the memories she had tried to suppress. The officer led her down the hallway, and as they approached the exit, she saw Liam waiting by the door. His eyes met hers immediately, and he stepped forward, a faint, tired smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Lynn," he said softly, his voice rough, as though it hurt to speak. "Are you okay?" She nodded, even though she wasn't. She wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay for a long time. But there was something about Liam's presence that offered her a glimmer of hope, something she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know how to feel about him yet, didn't know if she could allow herself to feel anything at all, but she knew she couldn't do this alone. Liam stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. "I'm here, okay? You don't have to go through this by yourself." The words were simple, but they held so much weight. Lynn felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to lean into him, to let him take the burden of her pain. But could she? Could she let herself trust him, or was it just another trap? As if sensing her hesitation, Liam took a step back, his expression softening. "I know this is all overwhelming. You've been through more than anyone should have to endure. But I need you to know, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving you." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and for the first time, Lynn allowed herself to believe him. She swallowed the lump in her throat and finally nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm ready to go home." The drive back to her apartment was quiet, the weight of the silence between them pressing down on her chest. Liam glanced at her a few times, but he didn't push her to talk. She appreciated that. The last thing she needed was more pressure. She needed time to process everything, to understand how she felt and what she wanted next. When they arrived, Lynn hesitated before getting out of the car. She hadn't been home in days, but everything felt different now. The place that had once been a sanctuary now felt like a cage, a reminder of everything she had suffered. Liam seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to stay here," he said, his voice soft. "You can stay with me, if you want. I can help you get out of here." His offer was tempting, more tempting than she cared to admit. But she didn't know if she was ready for that kind of change. Her heart ached, not just from everything that had happened with Brian, but from the uncertainty of her own feelings. She couldn't just run from her problems. She had to face them, even if it meant staying in this place a little longer. "I'll stay here for now," she said, her voice firm, despite the uncertainty in her chest. "But thank you." Liam didn't push her. He simply nodded and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "All right. If you need anything, I'm just a phone call away." Lynn smiled back, though it felt more like an instinct than anything real. "I know." "Thanks, Liam." As he drove off, leaving her standing in front of her apartment, Lynn felt a mix of emotions. She wanted to be free of Brian's hold, but the reality of it all was sinking in. She was alone now, with no one to protect her except herself. She couldn't keep relying on others. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was done being a victim. She was done being weak. That night, as Lynn lay in bed, her thoughts swirled. She thought about the years she had spent with Brian, years of manipulation, deceit, and cruelty. She thought about Liam, the man who had once been a distant acquaintance, now standing by her side, offering protection, offering something more. But could she truly let herself trust him? Could she let herself love again? As she drifted off to sleep, the questions lingered in her mind, unanswered. And though the room was silent, the weight of everything she had endured pressed heavily against her chest. The next morning, everything felt different. The air was quieter, the world outside less hostile. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. But that hope was fragile. It could shatter in an instant. Part 4. The calm before the storm. The days that followed were quieter than Lynn had expected. After the chaos of the past few weeks, a strange stillness had settled in her life. She was still shaken by the events with Brian, but she had found a semblance of normalcy. For the first time in a long time, she woke up in her own bed, the quiet hum of the morning outside her window bringing her a sense of peace. The memories of Brian's threats, his obsession, were still fresh in her mind, but the absence of his presence felt like a small victory. Liam had kept his promise. He checked in regularly, but he didn't push. He gave her the space she needed while offering support when she needed it most. Sometimes, he'd call to ask if she wanted company, and sometimes he'd show up with coffee or flowers, small gestures, but they meant more to her than she had realized. He was patient with her, understanding her need to heal on her terms. Despite his efforts to help her move forward, Lynn found herself wrestling with a growing sense of unease. There were still unanswered questions, lingering doubts. She hadn't fully processed what had happened, not yet. The truth was, she didn't know if she could ever truly escape the ghosts of her past. Brian's cruelty still haunted her, and although the police had taken action, she wasn't naive enough to think that he was completely out of the picture. But as time passed, she began to rebuild the fragments of her life that had been shattered. Her job at the hospital, once a place she dreaded going to, had become a refuge, a place where she could focus on others and momentarily forget about her own pain. Her colleagues were kind, their concern for her genuine, and she appreciated their support. They had no idea what she had been through, but it was enough that they treated her with respect and warmth. One evening, after a long day of work, Lynn sat in her apartment, sipping tea and reflecting on how far she had come. She had told herself she would never be the same after everything, but perhaps that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. She had grown stronger, more resilient, and she could see glimpses of the person she had once been, the confident, independent woman who had been forced to retreat into the shadows for far too long. The sound of her phone buzzing interrupted her thoughts. It was Liam. "Hey," she answered, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "What's up?" "Just wanted to check in." Liam's voice came through the phone, smooth and warm. "How are you doing?" "I'm managing," Lynn replied, her voice softer than she intended. She could hear the concern in his tone, and it made her heart ache. "It's been quiet." "Too quiet, almost." Liam was silent for a moment. "You're not just talking about the peace at home, are you?" Lynn hesitated. She didn't want to burden him with her fears, but there was no denying that something still gnawed at her. "No, I keep thinking about Brian. What if he's still out there, plotting something? I don't trust him, Liam." "I get it," Liam said, his voice steady. "You have every right to be worried. But I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Not while I'm here." Lynn swallowed hard. It was comforting, hearing those words. But at the same time, they filled her with a sense of dread. What if it wasn't enough? What if she was in danger no matter what precautions were taken? "I just wish I could forget all of this," she murmured, the weight of her past pressing down on her chest. "But I can't. It's like it's always there, lurking in the back of my mind." Liam sighed softly. "I understand. But, Lynn, you can't let him control your life any longer. He's in prison now. He can't hurt you. And I won't let anyone else hurt you, either." His words were meant to reassure her, but they only highlighted the uncertainty she still felt. Brian's obsession with her was something that couldn't be easily erased, and though she tried to convince herself that he was no longer a threat, the doubt lingered. There was a knock at her door, breaking the silence of the moment. "Hold on, Liam," Lynn said quickly, pulling the phone from her ear and walking toward the door. She peered through the peephole and saw a familiar face, her colleague, Angela, standing outside with a bag of takeout food in her hands. Lynn opened the door. "Hey, what's up?" Angela smiled brightly, her presence a welcome distraction. "I brought you dinner. Thought you might be hungry." We haven't really caught up in a while. Lynn's smile faltered, but she quickly masked it. Thanks, Angela. You're too kind. Angela stepped inside, setting the bag down on the kitchen counter. You look better, she remarked, her eyes studying Lynn with an appraising gaze. You seem more at ease, at least. Lynn shrugged, not wanting to admit how much work it was to appear like she was doing okay. I'm trying. Angela raised an eyebrow. Trying is good. But you deserve more than that, Lynn. You deserve to feel happy again. Lynn met her gaze, a sense of vulnerability washing over her. I don't know if I can feel happy again, Angela. Not after everything. Angela's expression softened. You can, Lynn. I know you can. You're stronger than you realize. You don't have to face this alone. For the first time in a long time, Lynn felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't entirely sure she was ready to believe in it, but the idea that happiness was still within her reach didn't seem as impossible as it had before. Later that evening, after Angela had left and the apartment was quiet once again, Lynn sat down by the window, gazing out at the city below. The night was calm, the lights of the buildings twinkling in the distance like stars. She took a deep breath, letting the silence settle over her. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Liam, just checking in. I'm always here if you need me. She stared at the message for a long time, the weight of it sinking in. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a while, she realized that maybe it was okay not to have all the answers right now. Maybe it was okay to just take things one day at a time. As she typed her reply, a soft smile curled on her lips. Thank you. I won't forget that. The future still held its uncertainties, but for the first time in months, Lynn felt like she might just have the strength to face them. Part 5, The Reckoning. The phone call came in the middle of the night, dragging Lynn from a restless sleep. Her dreams were filled with shadows, faces she couldn't place, whispers she couldn't understand. She jolted awake, heart pounding, only to hear her phone vibrating on the bedside table. Groggy and disoriented, she reached for it, rubbing her eyes as she saw the caller ID, Liam. Hello? She answered, her voice thick with sleep. Lynn, are you okay? Liam's voice came through the phone, urgent but calm. I need you to listen to me carefully. Lynn blinked, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. Liam? What's going on? There was a brief pause, as if he was weighing his words. Brian's out. The words hit her like a slap. What do you mean, out? Her voice faltered, panic rising in her chest. He escaped, Lynn. Last night. We don't know how he did it, but he's gone. The police are on it, but I need you to be careful. Lock the doors, stay inside. Don't go anywhere alone. Her blood ran cold. Brian. Out. How could this be happening again? I don't understand, how could he escape? Lynn stammered. Isn't he supposed to be locked up? We don't have all the details yet, but there's a leak somewhere. A break in the system. All I know is that he's on the run, and they're searching for him as we speak. Liam's voice softened, as though trying to reassure her. But Lynn, you have to trust me. I won't let him hurt you again. I'll be there first thing in the morning. Lynn's hand shook as she held the phone. Her mind raced. Brian had always been relentless, but this, escaping from prison? It was worse than she'd imagined. She couldn't let herself fall into the same trap again, not after everything she had been through. What should I do? She asked, her voice small, vulnerable. I can't. I can't go through this again, Liam. I know, Liam replied gently. Just stay safe. Stay inside, and don't do anything without letting me know. I'll come over as soon as I can. The call ended, leaving Lynn staring at the screen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Brian was out there. And if there was one thing she knew about him, it was that he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. What if he came after her again? The night seemed impossibly long. Lynn lay awake, her eyes wide open, listening to every creak and groan of her apartment, half expecting to hear a knock on the door, or the sound of footsteps outside. Her mind wouldn't stop racing, thoughts of Brian's cold eyes and the terrible things he had done swirling through her head. By the time the first light of morning filtered through the curtains, she was already up, pacing restlessly. She couldn't wait for Liam to arrive. She needed to do something, anything, to feel like she was in control. She pulled on a jacket, knowing she couldn't stay cooped up forever. She had to be strong, had to keep it together. There was a knock at the door just as she was about to step out. Her heart skipped in her chest. She froze. She hadn't expected Liam to show up so soon. But when she opened the door, it wasn't Liam. Standing there, with a smirk that made her stomach twist, was none other than Brian. "You didn't think I'd let you get away, did you?" His voice was like poison, dripping with malice. His eyes, wide and manic, glinted in the early morning light. "I've been looking for you everywhere, Lynn. You think you can escape me? Think again." Lynn's blood ran cold as she backed away, her body trembling. She had been warned, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. Brian was here. Standing in her doorway. I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaky but defiant. She glanced around frantically, looking for anything that could help her. Brian laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "Oh, I know exactly what you're thinking. You think you can just run away, live your little life, get married to your little soldier. But you're mine, Lynn. You were always mine." Lynn's heart raced. The terror she'd been trying to suppress came rushing back to the surface, and her instincts screamed at her to run. But she couldn't. Not like this. Not again. Before she could react, Brian shoved past her into the apartment, his presence filling the room like a dark storm cloud. He slammed the door shut behind him, trapping them inside. "What do you want, Brian?" Lynn managed, her voice steadier now, but her mind racing. "What do you think this is going to accomplish? You're a fugitive. They'll catch you." Brian's eyes flickered with anger. "They can't stop me. No one can. I've got nothing left to lose, Lynn. But you? You have everything. You think I'm just going to let you go? Let you walk away with him?" His eyes hardened, narrowing. "No. I'm going to make sure you regret ever thinking you could leave me." Lynn stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching for the phone in her pocket. She had to call Liam. But Brian was faster. In an instant, he grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully. "Don't even think about it," he growled. Lynn winced in pain, but she didn't give in. "You're crazy, Brian. Let me go." For a moment, his grip softened, and Lynn thought, just for a second, that maybe he would back off. But the look in his eyes told her otherwise. He was too far gone. "Not until you understand," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You're mine. And I will make you see that." Just then, the sound of a car door slamming outside broke the tension in the room. It was followed by the rapid approach of footsteps on the stairs. "Brian," Lynn said, her voice suddenly urgent. "Liam's here." Brian's face twisted with rage as he turned toward the door, but it was already too late. The sound of a door slamming open echoed through the hallway. Liam burst into the apartment, his eyes wild with panic and fury. "Get away from her, Brian," Liam's voice rang out. He lunged forward, grabbing Brian by the shoulder and shoving him back. For a moment, there was only chaos, the two men grappling, the sound of fists hitting flesh. Lynn stood frozen in place, her heart pounding as the fight unfolded in front of her. Liam was holding his own, but Brian was larger, stronger. Lynn's instincts kicked in. She had to do something. Anything. She grabbed the lamp from the table and swung it at Brian with all the strength she had left. The lamp cracked against his skull, sending him staggering back. "Run!" Liam shouted, his voice strained. "Go, Lynn. Get out of here." Lynn didn't hesitate. She bolted for the door, hearing Brian's enraged screams as she ran. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Liam would deal with Brian. She knew he would. But as Lynn raced down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Brian was still out there, still dangerous. The fight had only just begun. Part 6, the final showdown. Lynn's heart was pounding in her chest as she sprinted down the hallway, the sound of her footsteps echoing against the walls. She didn't dare look back, even though every instinct in her screamed to do so. She could hear the fight behind her, punches landing, furniture crashing, the sound of Brian's furious shouts and Liam's deep, steady voice trying to keep the situation under control. But Lynn didn't have time to wait for the outcome. She needed to escape. As she reached the stairs, she glanced down to see the street through the building's window below. A sliver of hope flickered within her, but it was quickly smothered by the terrifying thought of Brian getting to her again. No. Not this time. Lynn threw open the door to the stairwell and ran, her breath coming in short gasps, her mind spinning. What had happened? Brian was out. He had escaped, and somehow, he was here, in her life again, wreaking havoc. How could she have been so stupid? She should have known that Brian wouldn't just let her go. The thought of everything she had gone through, the endless manipulation, the fear. Everything surged up within her, threatening to suffocate her. But there was no time for that now. She had to survive. She burst through the stairwell door, into the alley behind her building. The air was cold against her skin, and the fog had settled in thick, blurring the world around her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't go back inside. Not now. She had to find Liam, had to make sure he was okay. Lynn's feet pounded against the pavement, her mind racing. As she rounded the corner, she skidded to a halt when she saw Liam standing there, his back against the brick wall, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. His face was grim, his eyes scanning the streets like a hawk. He hadn't seen her yet. Liam! Lynn called, running toward him. He turned, his eyes softening when he saw her, but there was an edge of worry still etched in his face. Lynn, you need to stay out of sight, he said, his voice low and urgent. Brian's still out there, and he's not going to stop until he finds you. I'm not going anywhere, Lynn said, her voice shaking but firm. She had come this far, she wouldn't let Brian control her any longer. I'm not running. Liam stepped closer to her, taking her hands in his. Lynn, I can't keep you safe if you don't listen to me. I need you to be strong right now. We need to be smart about this. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, but you have to trust me. I do trust you, Lynn whispered, her eyes meeting his. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel something close to peace. I just need this to end. I can't keep living like this, Liam. I can't keep looking over my shoulder, wondering when he's going to show up again. I'm so tired. Liam's gaze softened, and he squeezed her hands. I know, Lynn. We'll end this. I promise. Before she could say anything more, the sudden sound of footsteps from behind made them both freeze. Lynn's heart skipped a beat. She turned around, her pulse racing. She could barely make out the silhouette of a figure emerging from the mist. It was Brian. Lynn's stomach dropped. He was there, standing just a few feet away, his face twisted in anger and a cruel smile playing at the corners of his lips. You really think you can run from me? Brian's voice was low and mocking, the words slithering through the fog like poison. You think I'd just let you go? Let Liam take you from me? Lynn instinctively stepped back, her body tensing. Brian, please. This has gone far enough. You need help. You're not yourself. Brian's laugh echoed through the alley, the sound jagged and cruel. You're so naive, Lynn. You think I need help? No. I'm just fine. I've got everything I need right here. His gaze shifted to Liam, a sneer curling on his lips. But you? You're just in the way. Always have been. Liam didn't flinch. He stood tall, his eyes locked on Brian with a determined coldness. I'm not going to let you hurt her anymore, Brian. This ends now. You think you can stop me? Brian's voice grew more menacing. You think you can take her from me? He took a step forward, his body tense with rage. She's mine. The air crackled with tension, and Lynn could feel the weight of the moment, the terrifying truth sinking in. Brian was a man on the edge, and there was no predicting what he would do next. He was dangerous, desperate. But Liam wasn't backing down. Lynn's eyes flicked between the two men, her breath shallow. She had never felt so trapped. Please, Brian, just leave us alone, Lynn pleaded, her voice breaking. You've already destroyed so much. Don't do this. Not again. Brian's eyes darkened, his expression cold and unfeeling. It's too late for that, Lynn. You're mine. And I'm going to make sure you never forget that. In a flash, Brian lunged forward, his hands reaching for Lynn. But Liam was faster. He grabbed Brian by the arm and spun him around, slamming him into the wall of the building. Stay the hell away from her. Liam shouted, his voice filled with fury. Brian's face contorted with rage, and in an instant, he shoved Liam away, causing him to stumble backward. Brian took advantage of the moment, pulling out a knife from his coat pocket. Lynn gasped, her heart pounding in her chest as Brian advanced toward Liam, the knife glinting in the dim light. She couldn't just stand there. She had to do something. Without thinking, Lynn rushed forward, grabbing a nearby metal pipe that had been discarded in the alley. She swung it at Brian, hitting him across the arm with all her strength. The knife fell from his hand, clattering to the ground. Brian staggered back, staring at Lynn in disbelief. You hit me? Lynn didn't hesitate. I'll do whatever it takes to protect myself. And the people I love. Liam was back on his feet, grabbing Brian by the collar and pushing him against the wall again. You're done, Brian. You'll never hurt her again. Brian struggled, but Liam held him firm. Lynn could see the defeat in his eyes, the realization that he had lost. His escape had been for nothing. He was trapped. Take him in, Liam said, his voice cold. He's not going anywhere. Within minutes, the police arrived, securing Brian and hauling him away. Lynn stood by Liam's side, her body still shaking, but she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. It was finally over. Brian was going back to prison, and this time, there would be no escape. As the police drove away with Brian in the back of the car, Lynn let out a deep breath. The nightmare was over. For now. But as she turned to Liam, her heart swelled with emotion. She had survived. And she was free. Part 7. New beginnings. The air was still thick with the remnants of the confrontation, but as the police car drove away, a sense of calm began to settle over Lynn. The dread that had hung over her for so long, the constant feeling of being hunted, was finally gone. Brian was behind bars, his power over her shattered. She was free. Liam stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm that had been her life. His hand was gently resting on her shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lynn allowed herself to lean into him. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling his warmth, and for the first time, she felt safe. It's finally over, Lynn whispered, barely able to believe it. Liam nodded, his expression softening. Yeah, it is. You did it, Lynn. You were strong. You fought for yourself, for us. The relief in his voice made Lynn's chest tighten, but this time, it was with something sweet, something she hadn't felt in so long, gratitude. For so many years, she had been trapped in a cage of fear, unable to move, unable to breathe. But now, she was free. The chains that had bound her to Brian were broken. There was nothing left to hold her back. But it hadn't come without a cost. Lynn glanced up at Liam, her heart heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Liam's eyes softened, and he pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her as he held her tight. Now, we live, Lynn. We start fresh. Together. Lynn closed her eyes as she rested her head against his chest, the rhythmic beat of his heart calming her. The future had seemed so uncertain, so dark, but now there was light. Days passed, and life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy. The chaos had subsided, and although the scars of what had happened would never fully fade, Lynn was determined to heal. She'd stayed in the hospital for a few days, mostly to make sure she was physically okay after everything, but she hadn't wanted to be alone. Liam had insisted on staying by her side, refusing to leave, making her feel safe in a way she hadn't known possible. His tenderness, his constant care, was something she had never expected from him, and it made her feel like everything was going to be okay. Lynn was still adjusting to the idea that Brian was out of her life for good. She hadn't even realized how much power he had over her until it was gone. The sense of relief was almost overwhelming at times, and it made her realize just how much of herself she had lost along the way. But she had fought hard to reclaim her life, and now she was determined to live it to the fullest. One afternoon, Liam took her to the beach, a place they'd visited together years ago when everything seemed simpler. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the water, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore was calming. It was the perfect place for a fresh start. "Do you remember when we came here as kids?" Liam asked as they sat on the sand, the wind whipping through their hair. "You were always so full of energy, so fearless. I used to think you were going to be the one to change the world." Lynn smiled softly, remembering those days. She hadn't been the same person back then, so full of hope and dreams. But sitting here now, she realized that maybe there was still a part of that girl inside her. "I was naive," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "I thought the world was easy, that everything would just fall into place. But it didn't. I had to learn the hard way that sometimes life throws things at you that you're not ready for." Liam nodded, his gaze distant as he stared out at the horizon. "I know. But you're still here. You're still standing. You've survived everything, Lynn. And now, you get to choose what comes next." Lynn turned to face him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I want to be happy, Liam. I want to build something real. I want to live without fear, without regret." "You already are," Liam said softly, his hand gently brushing against hers. "You're already doing it." The simplicity of his words filled her with warmth. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for sure, she didn't want to do it alone. Not anymore. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and purple, Lynn felt something stir within her, a sense of hope, of possibility. For the first time in a long time, she could see a future that was hers. A future where she was in control. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. A few months later, things were different. Brian had been tried and convicted for his crimes, including the illegal actions he had taken within the military. His sentence was long, and he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. His influence was gone, and the people who had supported him, including Cindy, had been forced to face the truth of his actions. As for Cindy, her life had crumbled. She had tried to paint herself as a victim, claiming she had been manipulated by Brian, but no one believed her. Her reputation was destroyed, and the hospital she had once worked at had fired her. She tried to rebuild her life, but it was too late. When her parents arranged a marriage for her to a man who already had children, it was clear that she would never escape the shadows of her past. She had fallen from grace, her beauty and charm no longer able to protect her from the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, Lynn had continued to heal, surrounded by the people who truly cared for her. She had returned to work as a surgeon, where her colleagues respected her skill and determination. She was finally being recognized for her talent, not her past. And in Liam, she had found not just a partner, but a true companion, a man who had stood by her when she needed him most. One day, as Lynn stood in front of her office window, gazing out at the bustling city below, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had come so far, and although the scars of the past would always be there, they no longer defined her. She was free, and the future was full of endless possibilities. Liam walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lynn smiled, leaning back into his embrace. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm more than okay. I'm happy." Liam kissed the top of her head, his voice full of warmth. "Good. Because you deserve nothing less." And in that moment, with Liam by her side, Lynn knew that no matter what the future held, she had everything she needed. She was no longer a victim of her past. She was a survivor, and she was ready for whatever came next. The chapter of her life that had once been defined by fear, pain, and uncertainty had come to an end. And a new, brighter story was just beginning.